Okay. She has just joined us. Miss Danny Cooper is in the building, so we're just gonna ask her to please introduce herself for us, so everyone is well acquainted, and so we can proceed. Um, can she please bless us with her presence? Miss Danny Cooper, or should we move to? Can she hear us?
Hi guys. Yes, I can.
Yes.
Hi my loves. How's it going?
We are good. Thank you so much, ma'am. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
We just wanted you to just kind of introduce yourself to the people, and they know that you are one of our special guests for today.
Okay. Do you want me to do that now?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, you got it. Sorry, my laptop is really not cooperating with me right now. Okay. So my name is Danny Cooper. I'm a high school history teacher. I taught at Pretoria High School for Girls for 8 years, from 2012 until 2019. This year I'm doing my honors in history, because I just really wanted life to humble me, apparently. And it is humbling me. I will tell you that right now. So yeah, so that's me. I'm based in Johannesburg, and yeah, I'm a big fan of teaching, and I'm really passionate about education and about young people, about this country, about being part of the solution.
Thank you so much. And I believe our second guest for today is here, Dr. I hope I said her name, Atambile Masola. I hope she can just introduce herself so that people know who she is, what is she about. Yes, the floor is over to you, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay.
can.
My name is Atambile Masola. I work at the University of Pretoria, and I used to lecture in the education faculty. So I've worked with teachers, and then just before lockdown, I moved to the English department. So I'm a languages person, literature. I What else do I do?
Fancy.
Do a lot of different things. I work for, I started an organization with Miss Cooper, which is called Asnagotula Collective, which you can follow us on Instagram to find out more. But basically, we do
Definitely
stories of African women which are not in your curriculum, but they lived and did amazing things. So our job is to get their stories out there. I write, I blog. My job is to do research, so I do research. And I'm really passionate about. I think of education as like a conduit into getting things right. So I use it as a lens to think about how to change the world, how to shift power. Maybe I'll stop there for now.
Thank you so much. And I don't believe there's anything else that any of my panelists want to add to that. I can shoot just into the conversation. Yes. Do you guys give me the go ahead? I hear Daniel trying to say something, but I don't think it is coming off very well. Daniel?
Can you hear me?
A little louder, please.
Can you hear me? Must I speak like Tariq? Guys!
Yes, there we can.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Hi. I just obviously accused taking the session, but just as a reminder, I'm handling obviously the people coming in and out and things like that. So just a reminder to people that might be new, if you have a question or comment, just raise your hand and we'll let you speak. If you don't feel completely comfortable with that, there is a conversation chat section where you can always ask questions or write comments there, and I'll try and keep up to tabs with that. But that's all from my side. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Guys, can I make a request? Can you guys maybe just introduce yourselves to I'm going to go with first name basis because me and Atta are friends. And you guys know I've been telling you to call me Dani and you flat out refuse, but that's fine. So yeah, just because like I obviously know all of you pretty well by now. I mean, some of you I have known for many years, but if you guys can maybe just introduce yourselves to Atta so that she also knows who you are and feels equally comfortable.
Most definitely, not a problem. I think
Sorry, and just to add, maybe just to get a sense of who am I talking to. So Dani did say it's former students, so which schools are in the room and kind of the parameters of the conversation.
not a problem at all. I think let me just apologize for not fully making sure that you are comfortable in the conversation. Some of us are university students. I think Kyle is the only one that is a high school student still. I'm taking a gap year, so out of that system right now. But like I said in the beginning, my name is Awad Kawemda. And I will pretty much be your facilitator asking the questions, and they are mostly going to be firstly answered by you, and then comments and questions will come from everyone else, and they will be also charted towards you. And I hope that we can engage in a fruitful conversation. Because Daniel has already joined us and said a couple of words, I think I'm going to throw the part to him to introduce himself and make sure that he is known.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Plaikis, and yes, so I was at Pretoria Boys High School. I matriculated 2016, I think, and I'm currently studying psychology in Cape Town. I'm in Pretoria at the moment, but I'm studying psychology in Cape Town, and this is just something that I've really felt passionate about, addressing problems at schools in terms of reform and constructive building and things like that. So that's why I'm part of this and part of this conversation, and eager to not just learn but also try and teach and educate us about how we can move forward in our schooling system. That's me.
I think I'm going to throw it to Mamelo to please introduce herself as well.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Mamelo Malete. I was in Pretoria High School for Girls, where Miss Dani Coops was, the best. Anyway, so I'm now in culinary school, living my dream, loving every second of it. So Daniel always calls me the founder of this whole thing. I mean, I always tell him not to, but anyway, he always calls me the founder. And I think the reason why I initially started this thing and why I reached out to everyone in the beginning is because I just felt like we needed a new angle at fighting social issues and just having a lot of people who are so passionate about social justice and whatever, just so we can come together and just try a different angle, because protesting and stuff is all good, but I think it's so much like power in knowing and in learning. And so for me, it was so important that I have a couple of people or a bunch of people who are sort of passionate about the same thing, coming together, putting our brains together and just unpacking issues and getting to the core of them, and hopefully, sometimes coming up with solutions and how we can fix them and stuff. So yeah, that's me.
I'm going to ask Alka to please join and introduce herself next.
Okay, hi, I'm Alka Detoy. I went to Girls High and I matriculated last year. And I'm currently studying international relations at Stellenbosch. But I'm also in Pretoria because of COVID. I'm just really happy to be part of this these conversations that we are having and will continue to have. I think more people need to join and more people need to be made aware of the problems in our society, because I think they're just oblivious to what's happening around us, and we need to educate them. So yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you so much. I think I'm going to ask Didi. Didi was on. to please join.
Hi, everybody. My name's Mudiri Mutsaledi, but everyone calls me Didi. I was in Girls High with Pretoria Girls last year and currently a first year at UCT, and I'm doing a Bachelor of Social Science. So yeah, Mamela asked me to be part of this initiative because I think I'm quite passionate about social change and, you know, being part of the conversation and everything. So thanks.
Thank you so much. I think now that the intros are over with, we can proceed with our chat. And I first just want to pose a question straight in to Miss Danny Coops. Why teaching? I think you have mentioned it before, but for those who don't know why you would want to go into teaching, and you mentioned passion. We just want to understand that passion and why you thought the teaching fraternity was the one for you.
Cool. Great question. So I was a really good student in primary school. I mean, I don't think that really counts for anything, but I was an excellent student in primary school. In high school, not so much. I wasn't a great student. And I don't think it's very helpful for teachers to pretend that we were all saints and that we all got straight A's and that everything was wonderful before we stood in front of a class. Like I didn't do great in high school, and in grade 11 I had a really incredible history teacher who just called me on my shit and basically said, like, you're not a mediocre person, you should be getting top marks. And he really changed the course of my life because he just really showed me the value of teaching and what an intervention teachers could make. He was also very passionate about excellence and about Black excellence specifically. So I went to a private school and he was just furious about the things we were allowed to get away with, you know, how mediocre we were allowed to be. And I think that's something that also really stuck with me, the value of education and seeing it as something that, you know, parents are making an investment in their children. And as a school, as an educator, you really have a responsibility to those parents and to those kids. So, yeah, I mean, I went into teaching because I saw the intervention that could be made in a child's life, and because I felt like I wished that intervention had been made earlier on in my high school career. You know, how does like a top performing student in grade 7 move to a high school and by grade 9 they're scraping through, they're barely getting by? Like, how does that happen? So for me, I think I just wanted to, I always loved working with young people. I loved my subject. I still love my subject. I think it's the best subject in the world. And it just felt like a good match for me. I wasn't totally sure about it at first in terms of when I was studying it. And yeah, against all the odds, I really fell in love with it, and it just turned out to be the right career path for me. I also just want to pose that question to Atta, though, as well, because she started out her career as a high school teacher.
Most definitely. It was definitely going to go to her. And now that you've given the floor to her, you know, she mentioned education being a tool for things to be done, right? And you actually mentioned, Ms. Danny Cooper, Black excellence. And I think in the Black community, I don't know if Dr. Atambile will agree with me, teaching is not necessarily a profession that Black parents prefer their children to go into, mostly because you don't make that much. You know, they prefer engineering, law, and all of that. So I just want to ask you, why teaching, and why the education space?
Sure. Yeah, I'd have to tell you my life story, I guess. But no, I'm kidding. I'll keep it short. It just made sense to me. I went to good school, and we can come back to that. But I had the same English teacher for 3 years while I was in high school, and she was amazing. And so, in my mind, I wanted to replicate that experience for other kids because I knew I could be the kind of English teacher I had, and then some. And I guess it was kind of at that most naive, but also understanding when I kind of did the numbers in my head, you know, I could be a lawyer, I could be an accountant, I could be a astrophysicist, I could be a geologist. But in terms of impact and in relationships, what does that mean? And obviously at the time, I didn't anticipate that education would become so fraught in South Africa. Things were still quite steady when I was in high school. But there was an understanding. Oh, the other thing was I had an understanding that, so statistically, I shouldn't be where I am. Kids who are poor, who come from disruptive homes, who come from poor communities, more often than not don't end up where I am. But the thing that made the biggest difference was the fact that I went to the school that I went to. And so in my mind, there was a direct and material difference because of the education that I went to. And I saw my world opening up because of the education that I went to. And so it was because of that. And I guess it's like there's a quote by Nelson Mandela, not to kind of bring him in the room, but it's one that I go back to because it's the one about, you know, it's only through education that the daughter of a mine worker can become the CEO of the mine. And when done right, I do think that it can actually happen. It's just that it's unfortunate that in the last 10 to 15 years that actually hasn't happened in the way that we wanted to. So and so back to what you kind of said, though, is that, of course, there was huge, my family wasn't chuffed. My family wasn't pleased at all. And I think because part of that is because education and teaching used to be one of the most important professions. So we need to understand that historically. So the understanding was that, well, come post-1994, our children will have better options than us. But of course, if you don't, and also in my mind is that if you don't control education, the people who control education control the narrative. And so I was also very clear that it matters that people like me are in classrooms. It matters that I'm a Black English teacher. It matters that I am a lecturer with a PhD in University of Pretoria. And so I also did it for that kind of bigger reason. And I kick and scream all the time. It's like, God, I would have had more money. But yeah, that's why I did it.
Thank you so much. Powerful, actually powerful. I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to add anything to that. Daniel, Mamelo.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? My laptop seems to be taking a hike. So obviously it's interesting background, and obviously we'll get more into the discussion as we go along. But I definitely like that we acknowledge the importance of education and how important education is in controlling the narrative, in controlling the population. And that goes from your secondary, tertiary schools all the way up to elite schools such as Boys Eye and Girls Eye. The education that we receive there has an impact on the future of our country, whether we like it or not. So I really enjoy that point, and I'm sure we'll tackle those situations later on. But yes, I think it's important that when we have these discussions, we bring in people that are not just knowledgeable on the subject, but have first-hand experiences. And although a lot of us are students, we now have the opinions of educators and teachers who give us a sort of not different, not opposing, but a very more broad perspective on things. And so hopefully we can engage very constructively in this conversation. And I'm excited to see what happens.
And if anyone else does not want to take the floor, I think we are ready for our next question. I actually want to, in taking on what Daniel had said and what Atambile had said, whoever controls the education controls the narrative. And thus making it essential for people who look like her to be in those spaces and to own those spaces, to represent people that were not represented before. Talking about representing people that were not represented for, as a white history teacher, Ms. Danny, do you think that in the education space, a white history teacher is not necessarily the best person to be teaching Black history, because there's exclusion, there's misunderstanding, and there's maybe to some degree or at some instances inappropriate inclusion of Black people or people of color in certain instances, and replicating stereotypes and so forth. Do you think that is something that is, an issue and something that needs to be looked into? And what are your views on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's such an interesting question. So, I mean, I don't necessarily think I'm the best person to be doing anything, right? Like, I think there's a certain level of holding yourself accountable and self-critique that's necessary, especially in a profession like teaching. Because ultimately, like, you have to think beyond yourself, right? Like, for me, I'm not standing in front of a classroom because I have all the knowledge that I'm giving to learners. There's an engagement, there's an exchange. So in terms of, am I the right person? Am I the best person? I think I'm a good person in general, and I think I'm good at my job, and I think I've worked really hard to become good at my job. But your question raises for me a broader point about history teaching, and how important history teaching is, particularly in our country, where history has been used and probably is, to a great extent still used for propaganda and for furthering a national narrative, right? Added to that, if you go from classroom to classroom, even within the same school, even within quite a cohesive department where, people get on well and work well together, you will have a very different experience in my class, and you will have a very different experience in a colleague's class. And when I say that, I don't mean, teaching methods and like I made my kids write their own study notes versus a colleague who would give them mind maps, right? I'm not talking about those specific teaching methods. I'm talking about content and how we focus on content and how we transmit information. So I think there is a sincere conversation to be had about how different your experience is in different classrooms. I think we have to deal with the reality, which is that a lot of white women go into teaching and are in teaching. I think we have to... I'm not a fan of the rhetoric that we must or the idea that we must wait for a generation to die out. Like, they're taking long, man. Like, they're really sticking around. So that's not working, And I think that really was the idea for a long time. Like, oh, we'll just wait for them to retire. Listen, they are staying the full 40 years. So I really do think there's a conversation to be had. Down the road from Girls High is Meisjeshoër. And Meisjeshoër is a Afrikaans medium school. And this is just a specific example about matric marking, because I don't even want to talk about what goes on in that school. And I don't even care. I don't even want to talk about it. But in terms of matric marking, these kids get to learn and write exams in their own language, which is already a massive advantage. And then at the Matric Marking Center, there's a specific room for the Afrikaans markers who mark the Afrikaans papers. And everybody knows they mark more leniently. So that means that not only is African history likely getting skated over or left out of those classrooms. But then come the exams, these kids are also getting rewarded for not learning about history other than their own. And so I think there's a real conversation to be had there amongst teachers. And I mean, I am continually having a conversation with myself about the effect that I'm having on learners, the quality of education that I'm providing for them, and making sure that I am the best person to be giving them that education. So I hope that answered your question. Sorry, it was very multi-layered.
Not a problem at all. And I actually want to direct that question to Atambile as well, to say, do we think that it is, are Black people being represented well, or is Black history being taught well? Because I know, for instance, my sister in her previous school, a teacher said the national anthem was written by the Soweto Gospel Choir. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to think that a simple thing that I think many of us here can actually answer. And so many, I mean, even I had incorrect notes, having moved from an F to an A because information that my teacher didn't actually take time to gather for himself and teach us accurately. So I'm asking because I also have experienced, and I just want to hear your opinion on the matter.
So I think I'll share some disclaimers. I don't teach history, so you could ask me anything about languages, but I think Danny is more than.
Yes.
But I guess at an anecdotal level, I took history in school, and my biggest frustration, I mean, I had a very strange relationship with history because there was the history that my mother taught me at home, and then there was the history that I learned at school. And in my mind, because I'm a child, I kind of just separated the two. Never at any point did I kind of connect the dots until much later when I was doing my own work. So the short answer to your question is obviously not. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that there was a task team for the education of history in South Africa not so long ago. I think it was about 2-3 years ago. And part of that was that if we agree that even in the last 26 years, curriculum transformation has in fact not happened in the way that it hasn't happened, actually. Let me just put it that way. Is that history is at the cornerstone of that. And added to what Danny was saying about the Macy's Word example, added to that is the language question. So not only are they learning mother tongue in this country, are not learning in their mother tongue, but somehow are expected to be able to excel and to get into universities that further disadvantage them. So it's so multi-layered on so many levels that for me, education is a social justice issue. And until we get that right, there's actually no justice in this country. And I mean, we can circle around that, but the short answer is no, it's not being taught appropriately. But I'm saying that with the understanding of, for example, the research that I'm doing. So, for example, I do archival research. I go to old newspapers. So there's an online, sometimes I go to the actual primary material, sometimes I go to the online database. So there's also a disjuncture between what we actually have on record and what eventually makes it into a textbook, and the choices that are made about the textbooks that you guys then end up being exposed to. And of course, the publishing industry is a whole other conversation about who gets to decide what goes where, who writes what gets published, all those things. It's money, basically. So yeah, it's not a good picture.
Interesting. You should actually mention that that it's much bigger than we may think, and we may focus so largely on the school, but we don't actually see there's so many other connected. I think for me, mentioning the language issue, I think in our previous chat, we also spoke about a student who had moved from a school that was predominantly, let's just say a township school, and having moved out of that school to a bit of a good school, a better school, and the quality of education and the style of learning were different. When we now talk about the kind of English that student learns, or the Afrikaans, and having to move into another school where it's a bit advanced, even though it is at the same grade. We spoke about that gap, but I think also teaching in itself, there is a lack of quality, or I can say, I don't know if I'm articulating myself correctly, but I don't know if you understand my question. And I want to point it to you, Atambile, because you
right.
the languages.
Yeah. Oof. So I think as a starting point for me, I don't believe there's a good school in South Africa. There's no such thing as a good school in South Africa. And that's my starting point, is that I think schools are unsafe for children, psychically, emotionally, physically, spiritually, intellectually. You will not find one school that if I had a child, that there was a school that I would want to take my child to. I won't. I'm hard pressed. And I say that as someone who's walked into a variety of schools. And I think it's important to say that. So even the very framing of that question, the idea that a child from a township school will go to a good school in the suburbs, I don't think schools in the suburbs are good schools. And I say that based on my own experience.
Yes,
and by
most
what
definitely.
And I think we can all see what's happening. The difference in that is the reason why these schools are still allowed to be good schools is the question of power and money and the geopolitics of this country. So we must name things what they are. So the disadvantage, or the thing of a child moving from a township school, moving into a suburban school, or the decisions parents like mine made in 1994 of not making sure that I go to a township school, but I end up at a former white school, was because of access. Is that there's this idea that English is the thing that's going to help you get ahead in life, and that you must forsake all else for this Englishness, for this assimilation, for this power that we are promised. But then, of course, the power never actually comes to you, because even your education cannot shield you from racism, sexism, and all the isms.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like now I'm rambling, but for me, I don't. It's an injustice, basically. And I think the beauty of having conversations like this is what would it take? What would we mean when we say it's a good school? So I started off by saying I went to a good school. What would it mean for me to just be able to categorically say I know a good school and not need to qualify that? Is that right now a good school means an English school? Right now a good school means a colonial project. And a bad school means Black education, means lack of infrastructure. And so for me, the thread is that at its core, education is anti-children and it's anti-Black. The education system hates Black children in the way I see it. And it is a project that is designed to limit and crunch up. And people talk of this idea of social death. I think the project of education is to engineer social death for Black children in particular, but a different kind of social death for the children on the other spectrum, whom we think of that this is a good thing for them. So a child at Macy's, word for me, I think is in a deep, deep, deep danger. In the same way a child who goes to a school where they're majority white people, that's dangerous. So not only is the system dangerous for Black children in very material ways, I think it's psychically damaging for children, white children, to think that the world looks like that, because it doesn't.
Sorry, babes, please, can I just say something? I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off or anything.
Yes.
I just want to say that for me, obviously, having gone to Girls High, a school like that, where you can count the amount of Black teachers on one hand, right? I mean, I think we all, on average, took about 7 subjects, if I'm not being incorrect. And I think I've only had one of those Black teachers teach me personally, right? So for me, I mean, it shows in like a subject like Afrikaans or English even, where you learn literature, right? And for me, in the curriculum, you have poetry, for instance, that's you have like a poem like I think the one that Carl brought up, it was Mutu ke Mutu, right? For me, when I was taught that, I think I was taught that in matric, and by a white English teacher teaching me about Black culture, about saying stuff like, no, this is what Black people do, we always hear from each other, and stuff like that. For me, I think that's such a destructive thing, but it's so like common. You find it everywhere in everything that you guys do. We did that the novel. I now forgot what it was in Afrikaans. Lin Salang Stanskuna. Never forget that one. And you have an Afrikaans teacher talking about Black people being poor and standing on the streets begging all the time and stuff like that. It's like, but you don't know my life. And I think we spoke about it last week in that having white psychologists at school, it's uncomfortable. It's just plainly and simply uncomfortable to go and sit in a chair and talk to a white person about your Black issues. And as much as I never want to make everything about race, but everything is about race. You'll never be able to give me advice on what to do in my life when you don't know what my life is all about. And so I think that we say this all the time. In these good schools, whatever that means, they're not representative of what our country is. Like I said, I think there were only 6 Black teachers in Girls High. I mean, the Black staff that they keep talking about comprises of people, your ground staff, your cleaning ladies, or whatever you want to call them. It's not teachers, which is not what our country is all about. And that's what makes this school so good. You'll hear a lot in Girls High. We heard you so privileged to be here. I'm privileged to be sitting in a seat that is supposed to be taken by a white person in this country. That's where I'm privileged to be. And so when you have stuff like this, this stuff is not just surface level things. Having a majority white staff it has such a much greater and much bigger impact on everything else afterwards, right? Where we say township schools aren't good schools, because they're in the townships. But clearly what you're saying is the Black teachers who teach there are the problem. And that's essentially what is being said to us. And so I think it's so important that we realize that how damaging this actually is, how damaging the fact that the only white person who everyone I think felt comfortable speaking to was Ms. Coops. Otherwise you're going to Maskosana, you're going to Mantuli, you're going to Ms. Mjad's to talk about your issues. I think that is such a destructive thing, because those are the only people who I feel like will be able to understand me, will be able to understand where I come from. And so I think what I'm trying to say here is that for me, I think Ms. Cooper taught me grade 8, right? She taught me grade 8 and it was all good. But besides just white teachers teaching history, I think just the whole syllabus, right? Like you said, I think we spoke about this once. The syllabus, just in terms of history, I know more about Hitler than I do about my own South African history. And so for me, can we just dive a little bit deeper into that? Can we just dive a little bit more deeper and realize that the curriculum is built against us? So because you mustn't know. You mustn't know about Chris Hani. You mustn't know about all these other great people who paved the way for us. And so I think that that's another thing that we need to talk about, is how the curriculum has also contributed to the systemic racism, just racism in schools just as a whole.
And I don't know if Alka or Miss Danny, please go.
Sure. I just wanted to respond to what Mamelo was saying about the curriculum, because I think it's such an important point. But before we get to the curriculum, let's talk about the hierarchy of subjects, because history is really one of those subjects that's had to fight for legitimacy. History is not a subject that parents want their kids to take. History is a subject that's a frivolous add-on. And then in the last couple of years, the Department of Education and I don't know who brought up this idea of history as a compulsory subject, right? And you know, if there's one skill that comes out of history, it's to be critical. And when this topic of compulsory history came up, my dad said to me, "Oh, you should be glad because, you know, it means your subject is getting the respect it deserves." And I was like, no, it means that my subject will take the place of life orientation, which is a valuable subject, should be a valuable subject, but is not being taught well, is not being taught usefully, right? They're not talking about things that kids want to hear about. They're not teaching life skills. They're not they're not making it appropriate for teaching now about this hierarchy of subjects, because it's really, really problematic. The number of kids who are being forced into science subjects when they are neither good at nor interested in science subjects, the attitude which a lot of
say something. Okay, Miss Coops is having, you know, technical issues. Her
towards
internet
teaching, which is, oh, my subject is so hard, you're never gonna.
She's having a bit of, you know, technological issues. So just.
But is that my Wi-Fi or is it hers?
No. I think she's having some connection issues. Yes. Do you mind repeating? Okay, she's speaking, but we can't really hear her right now. I don't know if we are going to be able to get her back. If she can hear us, I think we actually had a question earlier on.
Guys, are you with me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Can you hear us? Okay.
Hi. Just to
yes,
intervene. If you are experiencing technical difficulties in terms
I see
of
she's gone now.
Yeah, I'll try and get that to Danny. She's back now. If you do experience any problems and difficulties with connection, the first thing to do would just be to turn your video off when you speak. That would it clears up the audio signal. So at least you'll still be able to speak. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see everyone's beautiful faces. But that's just if in case anyone's connection starts giving problems, just turn your video off and the sound should be sorted relatively.
Sorry about that, guys. So I have no idea at what point it cut off, but basically I was saying that I really have a huge problem with the hierarchy of subjects. At Girls High, we were at maximum capacity by last year. So there were 150 girls taking history in grades 12 and in grade 11. That's half the grade, and there were only 4 history teachers, senior history teachers. So for me, we have to look at how we support and incentivize subjects. We have to look at the value that we place on them. I think it's grossly unfair to say to life orientation teachers or to history teachers like, oh, your subject is useless or you're not doing a good enough job, when people don't give it its due respect in society. So for me, that's just a personal point. And then in terms of the curriculum, there is no argument here. It needs to be decolonized. It needs to be reprioritized. It needs to be, it needs to put the Black child at the focus, at the center of why we are doing this. Because ultimately, so what Atambile said really struck a chord for me. She said, being in a white majority situation, classroom, or in my case, staff room, I want like everybody to understand that that is not normal in this country. It's not normal to be in a white majority scenario because we don't live in a white majority country. So if the room you are in is not reflective of the country you live in, that's not healthy for Black kids, and that is not healthy for white kids. It's really not. So I think that was such an important point for me. And I think when we think about history and the curriculum, or we think about English and the English curriculum, or we think about maths and the maths curriculum, you know, we need to think about centering African theories, African writers, African historians, African histories as an urgent priority. I really think it's an urgent priority.
And I agree. So go.
If I can hop onto that. And this is more a question to panelists, guests, and everyone who is watching. And it's based on what happened a couple of weeks ago, but it falls into the whole history thing, decolonization. And if anyone has heard about it, then free to comment and give your opinion. But I think it happened a couple of weeks ago, and it happened in the Western Cape, where a teacher gave his class an activity in which they had to design a slavery advert auction, something like that, along those lines. And although he wasn't fired, I think he was subjected to sensitivity training. He did resign, and there was a big debate about it. And I saw a lot of people comment, this is racist, this is inappropriate, this is just wrong. And that was my mindset in the beginning, to be honest. I thought, this isn't right. How can you give these children, this is destructive, kids don't take these things seriously. And I, after having a discussion with other people that knew about the situation, my opinion or my view on it slightly changed to trying to understand that if we are going to speak about educating Black history, and we are trying to educate from a decolonization aspect, and we apply the learnings of having a Black consciousness and such forth, then there should be some acknowledgement to the past of non-whites in South Africa. And it is a difficult situation because you say, how do you implement that? I think the way implemented was wrong, but I think the concept could have been done in a suitable place, regardless of who the teacher was, to educate both non-whites and white kids that kind of brutality that happened. Design this, and then next week show them exactly what it looked like, exactly how it was, exactly what Black people had to endure standing on a podium being sold off like they were a piece of meat, So I think it all depends, and it was a very interesting story that happened, but it's a wildly discussive topic about Black consciousness. And one thing that I do stand by is that when we teach Black history, we need to keep in mind, or South African history, we need to keep in mind not just to show like apartheid, not just to show the struggles that non-whites endured, but also to show the power that non-whites had, the power of the Khoisan, the power of the Zulu, and how they reigned and how powerful they were, and the fact that Shaka Zulu's battle tactics were still being used in some of the best militaries in the world today. How much we've contributed to the world, the Western world even, as non-whites, as Black people. And so it's not just about the struggles and the downships or hardships of non-whites, but also the success, the accomplishments, the growth, the structure that we've contributed. And that's just having to take in the whole of everything. But yeah, that's just my point. I think it's a very interesting article. If people don't really know about it, read up about it and talk to people about it, because, on one hand, we can cut people often say, no, that's very inappropriate. But on the other hand, we can say, maybe we didn't really educate people in that very harsh sense of like put yourself in that person's shoes. As a non-white, put yourself in the shoes of someone who would be sold. And as a white person, put yourself in the shoes of someone who would sell someone, and educate them from that kind of first person perspective. But that's just my point I'd like to make. Yeah, that's just something.
And I think I just want to quickly jump in before anyone else. I think Miss Danny has her hand up, and I will allow it to go in. And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Educating, and like Athabile had mentioned, that the way in which the education system is currently, it's damaging and toxic to both the Black child and the white child. And I 100% agree. I agree that maybe the method, I haven't read the article. I agree that the method may have been, different, could have been altered to have a better, approach to the matter. But for me, what is my problem is, if let's say that was in history, that is the exercise. When the rest of the subjects do not correlate with the goal that non-white students should understand the experiences and past experiences and current experiences of racism, both institutional, interpersonal, and structural, that Black people face, right? So, for instance, in literature, I took literature, right? We had to fight to have a book that was not even South African, but a Black person had written it. We had to argue that we needed that. We needed to learn about other Black writers and their perspective on matters that affect us. So for me, is that many times such things, when we see them in history books and all of that, there are jokes made. For instance, Afrophobia or xenophobia. If we have a darker-skinned person in the class, they're going to pick up the textbook and be like, this looks like you. So it also gaslights, actually, racism. When other subjects don't get in line to make sure that you understand the detrimental effect this has both on you as a Black student and you as a non-Black student. So for me, it's also about, if you had taken Steve Biko's book, I Write What I Like, for instance, that in many chapters of the book, if you've read it, he speaks about how much the Black people and Black in general has been associated with such negativity. We can come up with so many stereotypes and negative stereotypes that affect us in many ways. So for me, if that in literature was also introduced, if we have, the whole having an exercise of where you have to draw an advertisement of the slavery and whatever, then literature should also get in line. Then history should also get in line. Other subjects should also get in line to fully show how much Black people have been affected by the past and are currently being affected by the past. So for me, it's honestly, there needs to be some sort of synchronicity that there is within the system, and it cannot only be one, because just like how both Ms. Danny and Ms. Athabile were in class, Ms. Danny was in history, and the way in which the history teacher made her feel actually changed her whole life. It was a turning point for her life, a deciding moment. And it is the same for Ms. Athabile as well, because look at where she is right now. So for me, if we have that synchronicity within the system, then it changes the landscape. But I think it goes back to what we've echoed so many times in our previous chats, that the goal of the education system in general, and this is just my opinion, is that it is not to create thinkers. It is not to create people who can question. People, they don't encourage being inquisitive. They don't encourage being curious. You are given instruction and you follow. You are given a directive and you follow. There's no room for you to say, you need to think about the matter. And for me, is that in certain, like we were talking about the syllabus, and I want to comment on that, is that when teaching as well, just like I made an example of, students will pick up a textbook and say, this looks like you. Hey, Mamelo, doesn't this look like you? Why are your lips so big? Like the way in which teaching happens in the like how teachers teach in the environment, it gaslights racism. It gaslights that segregation. So for me, it's important for us to actually understand how the way in which teachers teach and what they teach and how they teach it is so far important than anything else. But I believe Miss Danny's hand was up and somebody else had their hand up too, and we will go to them as well. Don't know how to would like to add. I think after Danny, can we please have Atambile go next?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Daniel was saying about teaching, like teaching about slavery, for example. Slavery used to be a topic in the curriculum, and it was removed at some point. But what I wanted to say about that is that we need to change the language. In order for it to be constructive, teaching slavery, for example, you need people on board. And so one way that you get on board is by changing the language around slavery, because I read this article about the language we use about slavery and how we excuse slavery, and we make white people feel better about slavery with the language we use. And so much of our education system and so much of what we teach and how we teach is about making white kids feel safe and comfortable, and never about making black kids feel safe and comfortable. And I think like there's a real conversation to be had, because I don't disagree with what Daniel was saying about teaching slavery. I think it's a really important topic. It's a really rich, interesting topic. And it's also a really personal topic, because you talk about, people being stolen from African countries and taken to the Americas, right? But then we need to change that language. So instead of slave owners, I can't remember the article I read, I can't remember what the different language that they used was, but it was like, it was much more honest language to describe people being held in captivity against their will and the monsters who were doing that, right? So, I just wanted to add that point.
Thank you so much. I believe Atambile wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think, the question of slavery is so interesting because, Danny's bringing the example of the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery happened in South Africa as well, and I think that's something we forget. And I've been thinking of just the image. People who've been to Cape Town will understand this. I'm using this kind of shape, is that in Cape Town you have the St. George's Cathedral here, you've got Parliament over here, and you've got the Slave Lodge right over there. It's not a mistake that the Slave Lodge is right next to the St. George's Cathedral, right next to Parliament, with the statue of Cecil John Rhodes in the company gardens facing those buildings.
Yeah.
So it's also just like it's in our psyche. And I think for that incident to have happened in Cape Town was just so telling of how Cape Town is not ready to deal with its slave history. And I think it's kind of those secret things in South Africa is that we don't really talk about how complicit we were in our own slave trade. And that's the first thing about that. So for me, it was not a surprise. I was like, of course, that something like that would happen in Cape Town. But also a different kind of slavery in the mining industry. So when we hear the atrocities of what was happening in the mining industry and what continues to happen in the mining industry, it's another kind of form of slavery. So for me, it was just an example of just how far off we are in this conversation, even while these things are like in our face. And then the second part to that, to what Daniel was saying, I'm conflicted about the use of non-white and who is non-white in Africa. Who is non-white and why is white the starting point and then the prefix non to describe other people? And I think that kind of languaging, we really need to challenge ourselves. We must say black, colored, Indian people, if that's what we mean. But let's really challenge ourselves to think very carefully about what it means when you say someone who's non-white. Because, I could easily say non-black, right?
True.
And then we have a different conversation. And then perhaps the third point I want to make is this idea of there's history and then there's black history. which thing for me is, I get it because it's an American thing. They have Black History Month. But there's something very strange about, again, in South Africa. I mean, you would never go to Germany, right, and say, I want to learn about German history. We're going to say, I want to learn history. No one goes to India and says, I want to learn Indian history. You go there and you say, I want to learn history. And so this need in a majority Black to still be talking about Black history, and in a continent that is actually responsible for so many things. But yet, I mean, even if you think of the design, I mean, there's a political narrative about how maps are designed, but even if you just look at the sheer size of Africa, for argument's sake, is that not only is it kind of, well, depending if you're looking at the map in a globe or flat, just the sheer size of Africa tells you that something significant happened here, but somehow we gloss over it. Right, and so we have history, and then we have African history as though it's like this peripheral thing on the side. And I guess that speaks to the question that someone was asking: is what is decolonized education? Is what does it mean to take Africa seriously? What does it mean not to regale Africa as a side event in the bigger scheme of things? What does it mean to talk about? I mean, people are talking about the 4th Industrial Revolution, which just makes my blood boil. But what if we're in the 10th Industrial Revolution? It's only the 4th Industrial Revolution because we're using it in relation to what was happening, where the first Industrial Revolution was happening in the West. What if we decided, actually, we're on the 10th Industrial Revolution? We don't know what you guys are talking about. And that maybe it's not even AI, but it's just like metaphysics. We're just like on a different frequency. No one's having those conversations because no one takes metaphysics in our context very seriously. So, I mean, this thing is complex, guys. And the fact that you guys are tackling these things on a Saturday night, can we just also take a moment to pause? I've never had to be this clever at this time on a Saturday night.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you for being this clever for us on a Saturday night. I believe Mamila wanted to say something. Her hand was up.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Just let me know if you can hear me.
Yes, I think everyone is having a little bit of Wi-Fi deckering moments.
Let me just,
and it's fine.
I can speak nicely. Okay, so for me, I just had like a brief little... I just had a little brief read just of the article in question. And it just brings back, if we talk about someone like Jane Elliott, I mean, I think we all know who Jane Elliott is. If you don't know who she is, she's this old white woman who teaches white people about Black history, right? And I mean, a lot of the times when you read, not articles, but when you read sort of her reviews, I don't know if I can call them that, a lot of people say that what she does is controversial, right? For me, it's not, because a lot of the times, I think just as people, right, we learn from seeing, right, from experiencing. And, if you look, for instance, as her separating kids, blue eyes and brown eyes, or even adults, if you've ever watched. I mean, I watched the one that took place in England, where she separated the brown eyes from the blue eyes. And the amount of controversy that was surrounding that was, no, you can't be doing that, but for me, it's like, how does it feel? That's the kind of emotion that I get from it, from watching people be separated like that. It's like, it's not nice, is it, when you're the one being in that position? So for me, when I read this article, yes, I mean, we can argue that the measures were extreme, but I think that we are in a situation, or we are in a position where we can't keep tiptoeing around this issue. This issue is serious. This issue is real. This issue has been here. And if we're going to continue to pretend like it's some sort of afterthought, I think that we're going to be in trouble. Yes, maybe the way that he did it is like kind of shocking, right? You wouldn't expect that. You didn't expect for someone to just make kids draw posters and stuff about slavery. But unfortunately, that is the reality. That is
Exactly.
what people went through. And until you see it, until you know, I don't think that you'll ever be able to understand it. Obviously, we can go
Exactly.
back and forth and say that his measures or methods or whatever were extreme. But I think that we need extreme measures right now. I think that we are in a place where, I mean, for instance, where white children, in my case, I mean, I was in business studies, and we talk about BEE, and they're uncomfortable.
True.
It's an uncomfortable thing to sit through. But you can't be uncomfortable talking about the history of this country anymore. It's just, and to the point where, I mean, my business teacher was a Black woman. She was like, okay, guys, it's done. We're not going to talk about it anymore because that white child is uncomfortable. Yes, these things are going to be uncomfortable to talk about. Definitely myself, if we're talking about slavery and about apartheid and about how it happened. It's uncomfortable, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, we talk about the way that kids in Germany are taught about German history. They see it. They see what happened, and so that's why when you're gonna come here with your little Nazism, it's a big deal there. But here we deal with Penny Sparrow. We deal with those kinds of people. It's such a normal thing to still in this day have that mindset. It is because of Afis, whatever, those little schools there, that we still have white people thinking that they're better than Black people, right? It's because of systems like that. And so I think that we do need to think about, yes, the measures are extreme, but I don't think that we can continue to walk around eggshells when it comes to the issue of race, when it comes to the issue of just Black history, just in general.
True, and I think Daniel wants to hop on, and then Miss Danny Cooper is going to be joining us after Daniel. That works?
Hey. And I'll put my hand up a bit too late there, but I just want to respond before we move on to the things that were said. So one thing I'm taking into account of everyone that spoke, and Mamelo put things very clearly for us, and she kind of alluded to what Danny mentioned, I think, earlier about how we're in a system where the education system is trying to comfort and protect white children, but not the other. And that's why history is never taught in that perspective of South Africa. We learn about things that happened elsewhere, which is baffling to me. The fact that neo-Nazism is more popular in America than in Germany, the fact that you can't raise a Nazi flag in Germany, but it's freely raised in America, shows that Germany made a active decision to educate its people on what happened in Germany. And that's what they did. They put them in class and they said, this is what happened. This is what your great uncles, your grandparents, your parents, whoever it may be, whatever year it happened, this is what they did. This is what happened to people in this country. They were sent to execution chambers and things like that. But in South Africa, that's never dealt with. And to touch on the question of non-whites and using those terms and things like that, I've become more aware to using non-whites, and that's a personal reason. And it's because as a colored person, not only have I heard from other members of my family and friends who are colored, but I've experienced it now myself personally, that people don't think that colored people were affected during apartheid. People don't acknowledge that colored people were going through as many atrocities as possible. Even when we touch on apartheid in high school, there's never enough about the atrocities that happened to all the races. And so when I say non-white, I'm saying that both colored people, both Black people were affected in those times. No one speaks about the Trojan horse that happened in Athlone in 85, where police opened fire on a group of 20 or 30 children for being what they assumed to be violent, killing 4 children innocently. No reason, no provocation, not even a presence. They hid in the back of a truck. That truck drove down the street. They jumped out of boxes and opened fire with live ammunition on these children. No one speaks about that. Not in school, not in social media, not to say that, hey, colored people had this bad too. And we speak about the Western Cape. When you go to those museums, when you go to those wine farms that have slavery museums, it shows you that in the colored community, we know, I'm pretty sure a lot of us know colored people with the surname of that is a month, like September, October, colored people with that surname. That surname is because when colored people, when Cape Malay started and they were brought into the country as slaves, they didn't have an identity. So what these slave owners did was they said, your name is whatever name you give us, plus your surname is whatever month you arrived in our country as property. So by walking around with your surname being October, you live that lineage of someone who was once a slave and given that surname simply because that was the month that they were delivered to South Africa as property and to be used to work on the farms. So I say non-white, and I do get somewhat personal about it, because I've seen a lot of people forget that it wasn't just unfortunately black people that struggled in this country. I saw there was a big outcry on social media a few weeks ago, actually a couple of months now, where someone said that colored people are a race born of rapes. They said that colored people are pretty much, our ancestry is rape. And that just bothered me to say that you not see that we are part of this country like you. Khoisan is the heritage of many colored people, and we went through atrocities the same as you, and that's why I bring that up. But I digress from the topic at hand. So yes, I think that, and I think Danny might have misunderstood, I am 100% for even aggressive education in terms of educating both non-whites and white children what happened in our country, whether it be slavery of a figurative or literal form, as well as the many atrocities that happened in our country towards people because of the color of their skin or because of their culture. And I say aggressively because sometimes the only way to educate someone is to put them in the position that they feel that that responsibility of what they did. If we look at the Stanford Prison Experiment, it shows what people do when they put in a first-person scenario of power. So yes, that's just my points. Sorry, I might have rambled a bit too long there, but yes, that's me. I conclude.
I think it was me next. I'm just gonna jump in. So just about this whole guy who did the slave poster activity, I don't want us to romanticize that either, because so the problem, like the discussion that we're having is we shouldn't sugarcoat, we shouldn't walk on eggshells, we shouldn't place white comfort above the needs of black children in a classroom. And I'm obviously in full agreement about all of those things. But then I don't want us to go in the opposite direction of saying that this guy was like doing a good job, because I don't think that's what was happening. I think that project, firstly, I don't even know why he did that project. Like, I don't know if he just thought it would be an interesting project. I don't know if it was part of the curriculum. But it was at a particularly insensitive time, and if it's a white teacher in a classroom with only white kids, I can't imagine that he was trying to make these kids sensitive to slavery and the issues of slaves. So I just don't want us to go too far in the other direction of saying that insensitive teachers are somehow like to be held, to be congratulated for being insensitive, because I'm also not doing that. I think sensitivity is what's really, or empathy, I don't know how you want to put it, but one of those two things is really missing in the classroom. I think that teachers are not treating kids with appropriate love and care and respect. And there was a similar incident at another school in Joburg where a teacher made some joke about, oh, I'm going to kneel on your neck. So I just don't want us to kind of go in the opposite direction of like celebrating this teacher, because I'd have to read up more about him, but I genuinely don't think that his motives were good, or I don't think that he had, I mean, I don't necessarily think his motives were bad either, but I'm just saying, like, yeah, I don't want to celebrate him either.
I think Didi wanted to hop in after Miss Danny. Thank you so much. Didi, the floor is yours. And the comment section is hot.
So I just while we're on the point of like subjects and everything, I think it's important for us to speak about how African languages aren't valued in schools, right? Because it's like I took Spedi in high school and throughout primary school, which is not something that a lot of students can say. And I think it's really unfortunate that in a country like South Africa, which is like so diverse and everything, that English and Afrikaans are always treated as the standard, as the baseline. You know, it's like, I know people are always so shocked when they find out that I took Spedi, because it's like, oh my word, like, what are you going to do with it? What's the value? Or you're never going to find a job if you can't speak Afrikaans, and just comments like that, you know? It's like right now I'm able to see that they were just, you know, they were unnecessary and they were hurtful, versus when I was like maybe say 10 years old and I was being told by aunts and uncles that, oh no, you know, tell your parents that you should switch to give you better job prospects and education prospects. Excuse me. But yeah, I just think that we need to unpack, because it's really important for children to realize the importance of knowing their own languages, because that in its own is power. Like, I'm able to say that I can communicate fluently, I can write pieces and everything. And it's like the fact that other kids aren't afforded that luxury is just really sad. And also we need to fund like these subjects even more, you know, because like if we can have whole Afrikaans schools, then I'm sure introducing a department for Sepedi, a department for isiZulu shouldn't be so difficult. So yeah.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
So I'm looking at Tseho. Tseho's just here for the questions tonight. Do you think as the youth we should pave out our future through Black consciousness and changing the narratives of how we see the Black body? Definitely. And perhaps to speak to what Didi said, I wondered how many people in the room have ever thought of taking African languages further in university. And I say this because, so a bit of history that I learned. So Afrikaans wasn't a language until the 1920s, which is a surprise considering what it's been able to achieve. So you have Dutch arriving, and then it is the slaves have a language, and it's called Kitchen Dutch, and that is something that's developed and snatched away from slave ancestry and turned into Afrikaans. And so there's a whitewashing of the language that the slaves spoke, which then becomes Afrikaans for the Afrikaner nationalist political movement in a sense. So I'm kind of in a roundabout way is like all those threads about what does Afrikaans mean, what do African languages mean, is very deeply connected. And when we talk about Afrikaans and African languages, it's again another justice issue. And so how do you get justice in terms of what Didi is talking about is that you do the work. So if you look at most schools, the kind of schools that you guys would have gone to, not only do you have a problem of the majority of the teachers being white, but even just the African languages, as Didi rightly pointed out, is that there are very few universities that are actually teaching African languages at a university level. And so it becomes this very strange and warped thing that the language itself has been infantilized, that the language itself has been underdeveloped. And I won't say not intellectualized, that underdeveloped is that it's a deliberate thing. So you put money into making a language change and become what Afrikaans was. So you build institutions around what Afrikaans was. So they built the Free State, they built Stellenbosch, they built Potchefstroom, they built Stellenbosch. I'm probably saying that again. But then you create a whole and UP, and you create a whole ecosystem around that. So it's not a surprise that in the last 25 years, even though we say we've got freedom, that there's not one child who's come from cradle to their first degree, being exposed to not only their mother tongue, but a multiplicity of languages in a way that is fair. Because the average person in South Africa actually speaks more than 3 languages. And so this question of like African languages aren't developed it's also points to questions of economic justice, is who gets to put money behind some of these, how do you build institutions that actually value African languages? It's not going to happen at a formerly white institution because they have no vested interest in doing that.
And that's just such a powerful point that you make there, that there's no vested interest. It's not something that actually serves them. And unfortunately, Tariq is not here, but it could actually point back to 26 years and where we are and how much the system is anti-Black and anti-Black people progressing. But I don't know if there's anyone else who has anything to say. Ms. Cooper, your hand is up. Okay, your hand is down. Okay, so I think...
Can I say something?
Oh, sorry. I did want to say something, but I forgot to unmute.
Most definitely. Please,
sorry, Elks.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add on to Atta's point about these institutions and their desire to change. And I just wanted to say that that's what's so important about student protest. And I really want us to acknowledge and not undermine the power of protest, because it's only because of the 2015 protests that this question of language in university comes up and starts to be taken seriously. Prior to that, kids at the University of Pretoria, at the University of Stellenbosch, at all of these institutions, they're paying the same fees, but some kids get to learn in their mother tongue and other kids must learn in their third language. We really need to think about what we have done in this country to disadvantage particularly Black children. So I just wanted to say, for me, and I think for many others, 2015 was such a monumental time, and it just shows the importance of student protest. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Okay.
Thank you. Alka, you go.
Thank you. Thanks. I just have 3 quick points that I picked up. First of all is a history class, because I took history until matric. As soon as white girls especially hear the word apartheid, they start, I don't know, they lie on their arms, they sleep, they don't pay attention. And for me, I feel like as a white girl, learning about our country's history in a class filled with predominantly Black students is a privilege. It's such a privilege to be in that class and to understand and to listen to Black students and what they go through, and how we then collectively contribute to create a better future. I just think it's ridiculous that white children still have the nerve to not pay attention in history. I think that's a major problem. And then the second point was that our curriculum, our history textbook last year was written by 5 people, I think, or edited by 5 people, and only one of those 5 people, I think he was a Black man, right? So I'm struggling to fathom the idea of how we as the youth, how we learn from the oppressor. That doesn't make any sense to me. It should be the other way around. I don't think we shouldn't be learning from from white people, especially our country's history, right? That's the second point. And then my third point was about the slavery poster. I think white people will never understand and should never try to understand what Black people go through and what they went through and what they still go through. And I think there are many other ways to educate children on slavery and what happened, primary, secondary sources, articles, pictures. I just think that was ridiculous, and that there are many other ways in which that man could have taught his students. So yeah, those are my quick 3 points. I just wanted to mention them.
Thank you so much. I believe Daniel has literally by the minute raised his hand, so we'll have him go after. Let's hear.
Awesome, thanks. Okay. So it was, my hand actually pretty much just went up for Alka. But this isn't targeted at you, to say that I'm pointing directly at you. But I've heard that comment before, and unfortunately, that doesn't. Excuse me.
Oh, which one?
Oh, the comment you made about how there's other ways to teach.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
So unfortunately, that kind of, in my view, I could be wrong, that just reinforces the thing of the notion of we need to protect these white kids. We're gonna teach them, but we need to do it in a safe way. And that can be very dialed down, and it won't have its effective thing. A case is like how we've been speaking about how in class we do something about Black history, or I can even remember in evolution, in biology even, we open the textbook and there's the evolution from monkey to man, and how many kids are like, hey, Taban, there's you at the bottom, and comments like that, like it's a joke, right? So when you teach them something that doesn't have a profound effect on their critical thinking, then it leaves space for them to make it a joke, to make it not seem as important. And it's like, if we take Germany, for example, again, it's like putting them in a class and saying, okay, guys, we're not going to put you through that, but your ancestors did very bad things. Your great-grandparents did very bad things, right? But yes, we're just going to show you, but we're not actually going to make you live through that and understand how serious that was. And I commented to Danny, I'm not sure if she saw that, but I agree. I don't want to put this guy on a pedestal and say, hey, look, what he did was great. I don't think what he did was conscious at all. I think it was ignorant. I don't think he thought it through, not because he did what he did, but because he didn't have a follow-up to that. He just gave that as an activity to keep the kids busy. And I think that's where it comes to an ignorant thing. He didn't do it bad. He didn't have bad intentions, but he didn't have good intentions either.
Sure.
And I think that's where the ignorance comes in. He just did it as an activity. If this was a teacher who did that, and then he was like, once that assignment comes in and everyone's done with their work, he's going to give them a hour-long double period lesson on slavery in South Africa and the atrocities that happened with that. Then you can almost kind of rationalize his actions. However, in a PC world that we live in, government, education department, parents will never accept that. That's the other problem I find in that even if it were a Black teacher doing that, there would be a big outcry saying, no, things need to be PC. You can't expose that to children. But we also need to now find, that's why we have these discussions, to say, what can we do then? What is in the lines of being politically correct that we can do, but still have a profound effect on how these children critically think about slavery, apartheid, discrimination, racism, oppression? How do we do that? And I am firmly under the belief, and I'll finish with this, I'm firmly under the belief that as a a white child, as a colored person, growing up and going to both a not so privileged school, if we want to put it like that, in terms of primary school, but then going to a very privileged high school, I can say that in both forms, simply teaching the kids and showing them pictures and things like that does not do anything constructive in the minds of growing adolescent children. And that's where I leave it at. That's obviously how I saw things growing up. And regardless of the teacher, there needs to be a more critical enforcement of history teaching in South Africa, in particular South African history, which I think is being mishandled. And I think that falls into one of the points we made very early on in the forum. If we control education, we control the narrative. And I don't want to make this political, so I'm going to end with this last sentence, but by removing Black consciousness from the South African population, you remove the power for people to think for themselves and for them to vote, or for them to empower themselves for a better government, a better country. That's it. I'll stop there before we digress even more.
And I think taking on that, it just pretty much goes back to the whole why we are where we are right now in terms of the education system and why it has not advanced. We truthfully have no excuse that, quote unquote, township schools that are seen as quote unquote, bad schools, are not given the infrastructure, are not given, better facilities, but also the content in which they are taught and the way in which they are taught. It goes back to, unfortunately, it is going to be political, even if we don't want it to be. It goes back to them not wanting to produce thinkers, but to still enslaving people and not give them the freedom to see beyond and to create better systems. Because when you create something better than what I have right now, you remove me from my power, and I do not want to be removed from my power. And that's when the abuse of, the system comes into. And talking about abuse of the system, I want to actually take it back to the schooling system. In the school, we have a code of conduct, and what I like to call, the constitution of the school, because this is the book of law. Everything goes into the code of conduct, and it is meant to, followed, and all the rules are in there. And for me, this is also where the ticket to being racist and gaslighting racism in schools starts. It starts with the code of conduct, because this is where rules are put in place to allow Black students to be ostracized, to be mistreated and discriminated on. We have rules about the unprofessional, messy or unruliness of Black people's hair, and how much also certain rules are very much focused on the black girls in particular, and their bodies and how their bodies are, and that's where that discrimination is. And I want us to talk about this, how the code of conduct enables racism in the classroom, enables racism in the sporting grounds, enables racism within the whole school grounds, because the people who are at the table coming up with these rules and sitting and discussing are not people who are inclusive, are not people who care very much for Black people, who care very much for Indian people, who care very much for colored people other than white people. And hence, when we also talk about uniforms, they were not really designed for a certain group of people. It only had them in mind. And I just want us to talk about that. Ms. Danny Cooper, I want to actually first have your opinion on it, and how much this actually, the code of conduct, is a weapon used by teachers against Black students to say, Atambile is going to have to leave us soon. Not a problem at all. We understand. Thank you so much for being with us. If you do leave before we hear anything from you, we just want to say thank you so much for being here. But I just want to go back to the question. Miss Danny does seem ready to answer.
I want to go to Atambile first, so that she can speak before she needs to leave. So
Most certainly.
I don't know if I don't think she needs to necessarily speak on the code of conduct issue. I'll definitely come back to it afterwards, but I just want her to leave us with comments and thoughts from her brilliant mind.
Most definitely.
Yeah, maybe just to say thanks for making this happen. I think it's really important that you guys are creating space to have these conversations. And I think, I've been having similar conversations with a variety of people, and I'm at the point now, it's like, what does after this look like? So I think for a long time, we're kind of quite stuck on what's happening right now. So we're stuck on what's happened in the last month. We're stuck on the latest wave of whatever it is. But What would it look like if we spent our Saturday evenings talking about the future? There's a woman I follow on Instagram. I don't know if anyone follows her as well, Alicia Garza. She was one of the 3 women behind Black Lives Matter, and she runs something called Black Futures Lab. And there's this idea of there are Black people in the future. They are people of color, even though I don't like it, in the future. And what does it look like when, even in the midst of all these bludgeonings and these institutional injustices and these psychic injustices and these political injustices, what does it mean to, one, do the work of healing, because we still have to live through this, but also to do the work of what would it look like? Do we actually know what it would look like in the future? And I'm not talking like Black Panther type of future. I'm talking like what does like Afrofuturism actually present for us, and who's going to do it? And so this question of like, must the youth this, must the youth do that? No, you guys are already doing it by gathering like this, but I wonder what is available to us in terms of just imagining more and more and more and more. Yeah, I've just wanted to end on that.
I think it's such a powerful note to end on. Thank you so much for being here with us. And, some of the things you said really gave me personally, kind of an opportunity to think and to kind of wonder if, where my head is at. And I think you'll never understand how much, your knowledge and the things you say and how you say it actually have such a great impact on others. And thank you so much for being here with us today. We honestly appreciate your time and the effort to talk to us. And I think it's necessary for us to have you again, and we just might, and hopefully you'll be down. Thank you so very much. Bye. Over to you, Ms. Coops.
Cool. So, Awekawe, you asked about the code of conduct, and actually the framing of your question was excellent. You said, how do teachers abuse the code of conduct? Because I think that's such an important point. When you talked about the code of conduct, you talked about how a lot of rules focus on Black kids and policing of Black kids' hair. And I want to challenge that, because schools are actually much cleverer than we are giving them credit for. They have these documents ratified by lawyers and checked by law firms, and the Nelson Mandela Foundation must come in and check their document and make sure that it's not discriminatory, and it gets signed off, and particularly government schools. They will use the Department of Education, they'll use the district office, and they'll say, but these are the documents that have been checked. So it's not actually the document that's the problem. And in 2016, when we had our protests at Girls High, it became all about the hair policy. And the hair policy had interestingly been recently updated just before the protests happened. The hair policy had been updated to say, I think the hair policy said hair should be as natural as possible or something like that, right? which would obviously include and in fact celebrate afros, which became like the focal image and the focal point. The problem was not the code of conduct itself, at least at Girls High. The problem was who was enforcing it and how it was being enforced.
Yes.
So the policing of Black kids and the focus on Black kids is not because of that document. It's because of a staff who, as we've already discussed, is not representative. And then it's also because of a staff who have not educated themselves, have not made the conscious decision to address their internal biases, to examine themselves. You know, when I was interviewed for my position at Girls High, I was asked by the then principal, how do you feel about teaching in a majority Black school? Because at that time in 2012, I think there had just been a shift in the student population. It was like maybe 55% students of color and 45 or 60% students of color, 40% white students, right?
Yeah.
And she asked me this, and I know, like, on one level, I'm kind of like, how can you even ask that? This is a majority Black country and this is a government school. But actually, I think it's better that she asked me that, because my response was, it's really important to me to teach in a multiracial environment. I would never want to work at a majority white school. And she said, I'm so relieved to hear you say that, or I'm so glad to hear you say that, because there are many staff who do not feel that way. They feel very upset that that the majority population of the students is now Black and not white. So, you know, I think we really need to look at those power dynamics. We really need to look at, firstly, you need to look at the function of a rule, right? Why does a rule exist? If you can't justify it, do away with it, because it actually undermines the whole system. So after the 2016 protests, a couple of friends of mine on the staff and I conduct, because we'd been quite vocal in our support of the girls, and so then we didn't want to we didn't actually want to go to the code of conduct thing, but we were like, it's hypocritical if we don't go, so we went. And this question came up, and when I tell you I nearly had a fit, I said, if you try and imply that I am supposed to be checking girls' underwear, I will quit my job right now.
What?
I'm not having it. Like, take that rule out of the code of conduct.
We're having a bit of troubles in terms
it doesn't
of
matter
Miss
to me.
Danny's connection. I think we have her back. Okay, so now we can hear you.
So sorry.
Not a problem at all.
I'm just saying that in terms of like this rule of underwear, and that's a very common rule in many girls' schools, by the way. You know, she must be wearing appropriate underwear. Listen, it's none of my business. Oh, and speaking of underwear. Speaking of was updated in recent years, the dress code for women was much longer. The policy was much longer than it was for men. The woman for female staff, which at Girls High, female staff are the vast majority, it included a comment on our underwear. We must wear appropriate underwear. And I was like, listen.
Who checks that?
Aside from that, like, the girls know I wear underwear, and I'm not going to feel ashamed of that, and I'm not going to, you know, I mean, obviously my underwear can't be sticking out, or I don't know, like, I'm a conscious adult person, like, I know how to dress myself, but I was just so angry that there was even mention of my underwear in this document, because I was like, if the girls can see my panty line, who cares? We're in a vast majority female environment. I'm not being sexualized at work. I'm not sexualizing them at work. I don't know. It just really pissed me off, to be honest. So I think the document is off not the problem. Who is enforcing it, how they are enforcing it, because often like a rule doesn't even have to be a problem, but it's the way that you enforce it, it becomes a problem. Yeah.
I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to comment on, the code of conduct and it being weaponized by teachers to unfairly, or to rather discriminate against, students. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything on that.
I just want to say, I think for me, there's two layers for me, honestly, when it comes to codes of conduct, right? You have the section where you talk about uniforms, right? And then the other section for me that I just want to quickly touch on is disciplinary systems, right? When it comes to uniforms, I mean, not just uniforms, but just dress code, right? I mean, if you're having a civics day, I mean, we were always told about the 3 Bs. I think there's 4 Bs now. Hold on. I think there's 4.
No butts, no boobs, no belly buttons.
Yeah. And then we also had recently they introduced the no backs, right? You mustn't show your back, whatever that means. And so for me, that is another form of, because obviously that is directed to Black girls, because
it is.
Things just look good on us. I mean, hello. And so for me, it's already taken, it's very subtle, right? It's very like, everybody, no boobs, no bums, whatever. But it is clearly directed at Black girls, because we are the ones who have these things, your butts, your whatever. And so for me, I think it ties in again with sexualizing Black girls, with making or holding black children just in general to a higher standard than white kids, just in terms of the way that we behave or the way that we should behave, and then when it just comes to disciplinary systems, I think that a lot of adults, and I think we've said this a lot, view Black kids, in terms of white adults, view Black kids as adults themselves, right?
True.
And so the implicit bias amongst white educators literally assumes already, just by walking through the door, that Black children are troublemakers, right?
Yeah.
If you've got a child who's maybe hyperactive, it's not a mental issue when it comes to a Black child. That child is just a troublemaker. It's just someone who likes attention, whatever. It's not someone who has ADHD. It's not any of those things.
Ghetto.
It's just because they're ratchet, they're loud, they're this, they're that.
Ghetto, yeah.
And I think, a lot of the times when you read codes of conduct, just, zero tolerance, whatever, to whatever, we saw the zero tolerance to racism and whatever. I think zero tolerance policies, in my opinion, they mandate punitive consequences, right, for certain behaviors, even for little things. So I mean, we can look at this not just in schools, but just in general. Going to jail for selling weed, right, is something else that's it's a small little offense, but you're still going to go to jail for 5 to 20 years. And so for me, I think that these kinds of zero tolerance disciplinary policies fuel that school to prison pipeline, right? And here I'm talking about Black male people, right? Or Black male children. It's this is what you're going to be. You're going to be this, you're going to be that. You're going to go to prison because, you did something stupid like that. I think codes of conduct are so just not inclusive. And it's again because you have white people writing rules for Black people. And then they tell you, no, we've had Mang come and review it, but who cares? I think I can't have, again, 5 headmistresses trying to trying to control a majority Black school. I think it's ridiculous for us to still think that to pretend like that is normal, because it's not.
Yeah,
it's not normal for us to be sitting here being ruled by these white people. And it dates back to these codes of conduct or these systems. I mean, I think Girls High was built in 1900 whatever, 1900 no black people, whatever that year it was. The culture that you have and the codes of conduct are codes of conduct that were initially built for the white girl. They weren't built for the black girl. They weren't built for you to be there. And so I think it's irresponsible of us, to still be sitting here and having this discussion about afros. Why is it that in 2016 we had to fight you to just hear me out, learn about my culture? Why do I have to fight with you to learn my name? Why do I have to fight with you to treat me like a human being? Exactly. I think it's ridiculous. These kids, I mean, right now in Girls High, matric is hard. These kids are losing education time because they're fighting for something that is so much bigger than them, right? And obviously, they have to continue to fight these issues, because if they don't, obviously, these issues don't just affect them, they affect everyone coming after them. And I say this every single week. It's not just about now. It's about what happens years after I'm through and I've gone through this. And so we need to look at these things. We need to challenge our codes of conduct. We need to sit here with your code of conduct and be like, oh, well, but you can't say that. You can't say, my hair is unruly. What does that? Show me what it means when my hair is unruly. Show me what it means. Explain to me, I think Ms. Cooper said this the first time that we had this conversation. Show me or explain to me how someone can say she's going to get raped if she's going to be dressed like that. How can you say that as an educator? Sit there and be comfortable with saying stuff like that. I think it's ridiculous. And we absolutely cannot pretend like this is normal, because it isn't. It's not normal for an adult to sexualize a child like that. Can these people please be children for a second? Jeez.
Thank you. Ooh, so much was said there. And I think Ms. Coops has her hand up and she wants to say something. The floor is yours, Ms. Coops. The floor is yours.
Thanks, honey. I just want to say in response to Mamelo, Mamelo said it, and did she not say it well? But I wanted to say, no one thinks this is normal. You know, when you talk about 5 white headmistresses, I just want to say, no one thinks this is normal. I certainly don't. I also want to say that I think this call that Mamelo made so well to challenge the code of conduct, like I said, it's not so much about the policy. A policy can easily be changed. It's the enforcing of the policy. And I think that's where I would say, arm yourself with knowledge. Know that policy really well, because you are signing that policy every year, but do you really know it? Because I'll tell you, as an educator, I did not know that policy well at all. And that was fine. That worked well for me because I didn't enforce those petty rules. And I mean, that was part of my, not conforming enough, not being a good enough representative of the institution, whatever. But I'm just saying, because I didn't really enforce those rules, I didn't know that document super well. And when was it? 2 years ago in 2018, I had a grade 9 and then a grade 12 in my form class. So grade 9 in my teaching class and a grade 12 in my form class both make a complaint to me about colleagues of mine saying that Bantu knots were not allowed, right?
What the hell?
And the grade 9 said it to me first. And she was so upset. I mean, this is like the first thing you are greeted with when you arrive at school. Your hair is not allowed. And the language that's used is not your hairstyle is not allowed or that hairstyle is not allowed. It's your hair is not allowed. And the way we use language, especially as adults, especially as teachers, especially as people in a position of influence and power, we need to be deliberate. We need to be
Yeah.
respectful and loving and careful in how we speak to children, because it does make a difference on a daily basis. So anyway, the grade 9 kid was super upset. I comforted her as best I could. I said I'd follow up on the policy and check if it was allowed. And I gave her feedback a couple of days later that it was. And then a girl in my form class came with the same complaint. So she'd been greeted in the morning with, your hair is not allowed. And at this point, it became personal for me, because when it's your form class, they are actually directly your responsibility. And this kid, not a loud kid, not a very extroverted kid, she was shaking. She was so angry. And she just said to me, like, how can someone tell me my hair is not allowed? So then I actually went to the document myself, and I combed through it, and I couldn't find anything in the document that said Bantu knots were not allowed. The hair policy in 2018 said it needs to be neat and off your face, and Bantu knots are neat and off your face. So at that time, I sent an email to the executive to say, we need to be careful with what we are saying. Are we saying, I don't like your hair? Are we saying your hair is not neat? Like, are we saying that hairstyle is not allowed? Because if you say that hairstyle is not allowed, but then there's no punishment that follows, you're sending very mixed messages, right? So I sent this email, and as a result of the email, the executive addressed the staff in the staff room, and what they said was, okay, everyone, we need to speak about a hair matter and a code of conduct matter, and I need to tell you that Bantu knots are allowed. That was the end of the conversation. I turned to my friend, I said, do you think these people know what Bantu knots are? Because they don't. Do you think this vast majority white staff knows what Bantu knots are? And do you think that they're going to go look it up after this meeting? Because I don't think so. And it just made me so angry, because that's what I mean when I say, like, know those documents well. If a teacher says to you, you're not allowed to do this, say, ma'am, please explain to me, like, where in the rules it says I shouldn't. Or if I'm not allowed to do it, why are you not punishing me then? Are you just telling me I'm not allowed to? Or are you actually enforcing the school rules? Because for me, school rules need to be legitimate and useful. They can't just be arbitrary and value-based, because then my values are different from my colleagues' values, and I'm inflicting my values on you, and that's really, really problematic. My job as an educator is to support and enable your values so that you can live the best life you can live, not impose my values on you. That's not what I'm here for. So I really think Mamelo made an outstanding point about challenging rules that are not serving or protecting you.
And I think if no one else wants to go, I will just quickly comment on what has been said already. And I think as someone who has very much faced that issue of code of conduct and it being weaponized, and to a large degree, that was the angle I started to take. Because I knew how lazy teachers can be and how lazy teachers are, I would just say, take it out, then show me. So because we always had school diaries, and in the diaries, in the beginning and at the end, they would have the rules and all of that and all that. So I'll take out my diary and say, show me where it's written, and then I'll comply. Tell me where it's written. And I'll just be like, well, I have class, so you can stay here and look for it while I go. So I think more than anything, what I don't like is that for me, with the support of my mom, of course, I was able to kind of get used to that fighting. I just hate, like Mamelo said, that Black children are not allowed to be children. There's a sense of we kind of constantly have to be adults in this space, because that's how we're treated, and that is the kind of attack we're facing. It's like an old person with another old person. I can't reprimand a 5-year-old the same as I will if I'm talking to a 27-year-old. It's different, because the way in which they understand my words and the way in which I'm saying what I'm saying, it's different, and we need to respect that, and we need to be cognizant of that. And I think there's a lack of tolerance, there's a lack of compassion towards Black students, but basically because of the racism. And for me, people just don't understand that these microaggressions that are paid towards Black students have such a large impact on, their mental state and their mental health, how they actually interact with other students. Because as a result of, teachers gaslighting racism, because they don't do this in isolation. They don't attack students about their hair, about their skirts, about their braids, and all of that in isolation. It's right in the open in front of other students, and gaslights, this racism in the environment. And for me, that's pretty much what I feel like also people, teachers, there's no way in which teachers are held accountable. And as a student, if I have a problem with a teacher, the first response to that from, management or whatever is to protect the teacher, rather than to say, no, this student is not a crazy person who would randomly, for no absolute reason, have a problem with the teacher, take time and effort to fight us, whom they probably do know we are very difficult, and say and be adamant that there's a problem that they have with this teacher, and it is a problem of this nature. We've seen what has happened in Table View. The amount of, how male teachers were sexualizing particularly Black students, other students too, most definitely, other female students, white female students were also subjected to it, but Black girls were under attack. A lot of mentionings of the way in which they look in, sporting kits, the way they look in their uniform. Do you see that kind? And then again, there's no counseling or any kind of therapy offered to you by the school when you do report this kind of matter, but they also protect the teacher. So again, I think for me, the way in which the people within the system abuse the system, and irrespective of whether or not it is not in the rules, as a child, I am at the receiving end of this. But I think we've actually gone so far over our time. I don't know if there's anyone else that has closing remarks.
Sorry. There's just a question here in the comment section that I don't want to.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry, you're going to read it. Go ahead.
Okay. Do you think that teachers should be taught to enforce? How do we ensure that rules are enforced if the disciplinary level or methods do not work effectively? I mean, I was in Girls High as well, and I was told multiple times that if I have a problem, use the system to get your point or problem across, and then the issue would normally end at the first attempt, first stop, first level.
So can I answer that just real quickly? Just sort of like a base level answer. I'm just going to give like a for me. I think I've said this now, is that challenge these. I think when I think as Black kids especially, if you are ignored essentially at the first attempt or at the first stop, usually you give up, right? You're just like, it is what it is, right? But I think we can't continue like that anymore, right? Hold these people accountable. If you have a request that you want to give to the headmistress, you need to make sure, right? And it's not your responsibility, yes. But unfortunately, that is the system that we are in. And the only way that we are going to change that system is by being persistent. I know that it's very difficult to be persistent when you keep getting ignored. But it's so important to hold these people accountable. Hold these teachers who are treating you like crap accountable. Call them out. And I said this, I think, in the live on yesterday, that call out culture needs to become a thing. When Ms. Cooper said something that's uncomfortable to you, you need to be able to have we need to have a system that enables you to confidently say, Ms. Cooper said this to me and it made me uncomfortable and I don't like it. Whether she apologizes to you or not is a different story, but she heard you. She heard what you had to say, right? These people are adults. I think if someone comes up to you and says, you hurt my feelings, obviously, whether you're going to have compassion for that person or not is like a different story. But to hold someone accountable holds a lot of thing, because at the end of the day, we know these people. It's not like a first time thing. They do this over and over and over and over and over again. And so if you have a call out culture, I think that can do so much. But also I think another problem that we faced a lot in Girls High is that no matter who you went to, the end result was always the same. And so I think we need to challenge things like that. Challenge this thing of having 5 headmistresses who are all Afrikaans, all white, all Christian. Let's challenge that. I mean, for instance, like I said, they're all white, they're all Afrikaans, they're all Christian. If I'm a Muslim child, who do I go to? I don't recall there being any Muslim teachers in Girls High, unless if I was, jumping over people. But I don't recall anyone being that person. I mean, it took a fight for us to get a certain headmistress to stop praying in assembly. It's that simple. Not everyone is Christian. You're an adult, you've been here. But it's again this thing of them not wanting to care, not wanting to learn. If you say, that's not my name, they don't care, simply don't care. I mean, they will call you whatever they want to call you the whole year. And it is up to you. And I know it's not your responsibility, but it is up to you to every time correct them. Make sure that they say your name correctly. I mean, saying your name, it's a simple thing, right? It's a little thing that compared to other issues that we face. But that's your name. Make them say your name correctly. So for me, like I said, I just wanted to respond by saying, be persistent about your issues. If they decide that they're going to ignore you, keep going. Just keep it moving.
Thank you so much for that, Mamelo. And I hope Lalani has her question answered. Ms. Coops, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to say, because Mamelo used me as an example, and I'm glad she did, because I want to say that the times that I was challenged by learners were the times that I grew and improved as a teacher, to the point that I, in the last 3 or 4 years, I can't remember when I started, maybe 2 or 3 years. Anyway, I started giving surveys to my kids. So at the end of the first term, at the end of the second term, I'd give them a survey. And it literally said on the survey, like, what can I do to improve as an educator? And a lot of kids would say to me, oh, you're just trying to get compliments. And I was like, no, I'm really not trying to get compliments. I'm trying to get your honest and open feedback so that I, as an educator, am getting direct commentary from the people who are affected by and experiencing my teaching. I know I'm not perfect. I know I can do things better. And I want to be the best educator I can be. I don't want to be an average educator. So I want to say that, like, in the same way that we've said, you get told all the time, it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to go to the school. It's a privilege to teach at those schools, So I don't want us to get confused. I don't want us to let our fear and our respect for authority to get in the way of our education and what we deserve, what you deserve as children, right? I also want to say, like, when you're told to, like, follow the line function and follow the structure and use the structures that are there, I also want to some extent to admit my complicity in those systems and my failing in those systems, because, I really tried, and I'm not trying to defend myself, or I'm not trying to, like, make you guys think something of me or whatever. It's not about that. It's just to say, like, those systems are designed so that you can't get those messages across, And I think that's a real conversation to be had, because there were so many emails I wrote. There were so many times I raised these issues. There were so many things I followed up on, and they go nowhere. And then they make you look like an idiot, and they make you feel like an idiot, and they disempower you to the point that, you know, when I first went on this Instagram live that I went on in June, I was shaking. I was so scared. I was absolutely terrified to speak about my own experience, you know, at somewhere I worked for 8 years. And now my choice to engage in these conversations, it's not me wanting to give the finger to Girls High at all. It's not me wanting to call anyone out by name. It's not me wanting to throw anyone under the bus. It's just to say, I am part of the system of education in South Africa. I am accountable to my kids who I've taught and kids who I will teach, and I am not willing to be complicit in a system that is hurting kids. So I just think there's so many dynamics here, but I want to say, like, I totally agree with Mamelo about, you know, calling out regularly, but I also want to say, utilize those teachers who are willing to be on your side, who are actively on your side. Make them work, honestly, because I worked, guys. I worked for those 8 years. And I think that we let people get away with a lot because we love and respect them. But then, like, why is nobody letting you guys get away with anything? Why are you not being loved and respected enough, you know?
I think, yeah, definitely. And like you've mentioned before, you know, we shouldn't be clapping hands for the bare minimum that we are, you know, supposed to be getting from our educators and our education system. And I think, Daniel, are you going to be closing?
I didn't plan to close. I just had a few comments. But I'll try and add those comments into whatever I would close off with, and then we can go from there. So to say that Danny is a good teacher in South Africa is the same as saying I'm a privileged colored in South Africa. There's not enough of us. And I don't want anyone to mix up that explanation, but what I'm saying is that there are millions of colored people, including those in my family, who will never experience and live the life that I do. I am privileged in that sense, and the education system falls short of the fact that there's only a handful of educators out there that care as much as Danny does, and they can't change the system. My views on the code of conduct, or I think the comment was following the system, or following the rules of the system and things like that. Yes, using the system. So my views on use, I won't speak about the code of conduct, but my views on using the system is to say that to use the system, you need to be able to walk and run. But as soon as you enter the school as a non-white, they cut your legs off. Using the system doesn't help for us. And don't get that confused. The system is there for a reason, and we need to make use of that and keep that paper trail. You know, you keep that evidence and things like that. And I'm not saying don't use it at all. I'm saying that we need to have a relative expectation of what the outcome will be. I've had situations at school where I've tried to bring up instances of racial discrimination, racial bias, and I've been blown off completely. But when Michael had an issue with his bicycle being stolen or something and claimed there was a black kid, they were very quick to interview all the black kids that sat at the black wall. That's just an example. But the system, unfortunately, is biased, and especially the disciplinary hearings of most privileged schools are biased because there's no representative of non-white faculties or students. But to close off, I think the discussion, or what I've gained from this, is that we are at a critical stage, and especially within young girls and boys between, I'd say, maybe 13 and 18, where what we see shapes who we are in the future. We're at a very critical developmental stage at that time. And so it is a big responsibility of a community to look after its children and help raise them. And that comes from the parents, that comes from the teachers, that comes from the leaders in charge. And one thing that schools need to do is to actively be involved in reform. And my personal view is that that will not happen until these schools acknowledge racial biasm, acknowledge privilege biasm, and acknowledge discrimination. And unfortunately, these schools will never publicly admit to that, because who would? But that's where it needs to start. We had this question a few weeks ago about, where does it start? Does it start at the bottom? Does it start at the top? And it's more complicated than that, because if it starts at the top but the bottom doesn't want to move, then nothing happens. And if the bottom wants to do something but the top doesn't allow it, then nothing ever happens. So we can only grow as much as we can at the bottom until the top decide to take accountability and do something about it as well. But that doesn't mean we should give up. That doesn't mean we should slow down. It means that, in fact, we need to lift up our voices higher. We need to be seen. We definitely need to have that paper trail, because schools have made use of their legal system way too many times on children in a very unfair manner. And the best thing you can do, especially when you at a school like Boys Eye or Girls Eye, is to make sure that you have every single paper trail, every single verbal conversation possible that could cause conflict, and to most importantly, make sure that whatever you do, whatever you plan to do in terms of a protest, a movement, an action, make sure that it's planned 100% to the T on details, on procedures and things like that. So that way they can't turn around and call you out for being disruptive or being a problem at the school. That comes from first-hand experiences. But that's I'd say my point and my closing statement. Thank you guys for this meeting. Thank you for the guests and for the other panelists. I thoroughly enjoyed just observing and learning from other people's conversations and points of view. So thank you from my side.
Thank you so much for that. I don't know. I think Ms. Coops' hand is up. Is there something that she wants to say? And then after that, it is a wrap. Ms. Coops, are you good?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm good. I lost you guys for a second. Sorry. I just wanted to agree with Daniel about the paper trail, because it is so important. And it's frustrating that it's so important, because your word should just be enough. But if you're not willing to follow that process of writing it down, handing in the report, making things really awkward and uncomfortable, then very often your complaint or your issue that you're raising just gets swept under the rug, it gets silenced. So I really do encourage you to follow that, to keep a paper trail and to follow that process. And then also keep a copy for yourself and keep a record of when you first raised the complaint, what the follow-up action was, what the recourse was. I mean, like we've been saying, this is a full-time job. You should just be being kids. You should just be getting an education, coming to school each day, feeling loved and celebrated and safe and warm and hopefully learning something. But you shouldn't have to do a full-time, law degree at the same time and a full-time public defender at the same time. But I also want to say, I love teaching. I think it's the best job in the world. I really encourage any of you who are interested in teaching, who are excited by the prospect of teaching. It's a wonderful career, and okay, you won't make the most money, but I don't think money is the point of life, honestly speaking. Like, as a public educator, you get paid a really decent salary. You get paid higher than nurses, for example, who work just as hard, if not harder. So yeah, I don't know. I do want to encourage you guys as well and say that, like, personally speaking, I love teaching. Having taken some time off from teaching, I really miss being in the classroom. I miss my kids so much. And you can really make a difference. You can really make an impact on someone's life. Sometimes, like, just by being yourself, sometimes just by existing and being an authentic person who loves and cares for children, you know? So yeah, I guess if we're closing, then that's something that I definitely want to say.
And I think from my side, Mamelo, is there anything you want to say, or after me, it is a wrap?
No, I think I just wanted to say thank you for everyone for coming. Obviously, this issue is something that's deeply important to me, and so I just want to say thank you. Just shout out to everybody for coming through. And you know, it doesn't end here when this conversation ends. It's something that we need to continue to fight.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just all for me.
Thank you. I want to thank Didi. I want to thank Alka. I want to thank Kyle. Amazing team we have there. People that actually came. But shout outs to everyone in Conversations for Change. All of you are amazing. I want to thank everyone that came, for your time, for listening, for your questions. Thank you so much. Your comments. Thank you so much. It gives us a reason to do the next one. And I think from my side, I pretty much have interfaced with this issue a lot in my life, and it's affected me a lot. It's taught me a lot. I think we can go on about a lot of the negatives, but I think it has brought a positive in my life. So thank you so much for everyone that has came. And I think that is us being done today. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at _Conversations for Change. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like, comment, share. A lot more content is going to be coming your guys' way. So please do stand by and support. Thank you so much for coming through. And I guess we will see you guys same time, same place next week. It's your girl, Awe Kawemda, and good night, good people. Thank you so much for coming. Bye, guys. Bye, guys. Bye, guys. Bye, guys. Love you loads. Love you loads and tons and tons and sugar.